Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I'm Tom Gross.
I'm Dan Ream, literally in the dungeon this time.
Yes, indeed. But we are remote from the dungeon because, as we always are when we have a guest joining us in the dungeon, we have to go remote. So I'd like to introduce and welcome to the dungeon, Matt Funk of RPG for Teachers, Which Pleas Publishing, and Campfire. Matt, you keep pretty busy.
I do. I know that we will launch into how I got into this, but when I kind of toppled into game design about a year ago, I decided I need a purpose that keeps me going, something that's actually going to bring value to people. And so I am driven by that purpose every day. And to your point, Tom, in a couple different directions.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to having a conversation with you about all those items. But you and Dan and I had the opportunity to meet this past August in Indianapolis at Gen Con. So that was early in Gen Con. We were at Trade Day when we had the opportunity to meet. So I'm dying to know how the rest of your convention went.
Well, it was really magnificent. So I came to Gen Con for somewhat of an unusual purpose relative to the crowd. I came for the purpose of discovery. I mentioned that purpose that I seized upon back in 2023, and that was basically that I want to facilitate education through gaming. I felt like gaming has that rare gift to really engage people and to contribute a lot of the kind of qualities that lead to improved education, be it critical thinking, team building, creativity. And so I came to Gen Con trying to figure out, all right, what do people really need? And in particular, what do educators, students, and various institutions that support them really need? And that's why I was present on Trade Day. Now, the rest of Trade Day, as you would imagine, was running around from one relevant panel to the next. So I was attending the keynote speech by Kathleen Mercury, who talked a lot about the intersection between gaming institutions and educators. I then, of course, met you guys. I then went on to a panel where a teacher by the name of Archie Fields was talking about how he had used Dungeons & Dragons 5e to teach philosophy at the University of Calgary, and to great success. And I was actually privileged enough to later sign Archie. His modules are going to be converted into both Dungeon Crawl Classics format and then later 5e format for publication through Which Pleas. And then was just meeting people right and left. I had to get some gaming in. The next 2 days, I attended the sessions of Dungeon Crawl Classics by my layout guy, Thorin Thompson. Brilliant dude. He's a fellow creator, and he runs a really good game. I turned out a very bloody game. I had no less than, not me personally, but the party had no less than 36 character deaths, which I think would be a record for any other system besides Dungeon Crawl Classics. Got those 2 games in, and then otherwise just kind of networked with people, talked with various critics in the field, talked with other game community, saw what the various game designers were up to, gathered information, then came out of there with a real sense of what I could deliver to the market that would really help out. And that, of course, was, as you referred to it, rpgsforteachers.com.
Awesome. I think, it's interesting and good to hear your story of Gen Con, because everybody seems to go for some specific reason, and other things happen because of the magnitude and the size of it, the amount of people there. But, I think when people think Gen Con, depending on who you are, you think, I'm going to Gen Con to just play games, and I'm going to go and I'm going to sit at tables all day long and all night long. I'm going to play games. And that is fantastic. There's others more in the industry who are in the realm of, I am going to showcase something that I have, or I want to go and see what the industry has to offer this year. And they're going for a purpose like that. You're there for networking. And Dan, I don't know about Dan, but I think, Dan, you and I are there oftentimes for sort of a mixture of everything, because we play the games, we buy the games as consumers, we network with people, we're there to talk about education and all sorts of things. So it's an amazing, amazing experience. But this is usually our first question, but since we met each other, Gen Con, got to start with that one. But so I'm going to toss this softball to you and tell us about your RPG story. How did you get into RPGs as a child or a teen or college or an adult? Where did it start for you?
It started by the lockers of my middle school drama building. And it started with us trying to take down IUs and then later popping over to the world of Corinne and going after one dragon or after another. I will say, being that we were all 13-year-old boys and most definitely the misfits of my school, it was pretty murder hobo. But it was engaging enough that I really caught the bug. We were, as you could probably infer, playing Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. We then went to 3.5 edition by the time I was in my college years. But then I really heavily diversified because I think, and this goes for all those in that initial gaming group, many of whom went on to become creators in their own right, whether that was TV producers or writers or analysts, that we wanted to have a game that was meaningful. And that was especially the case for me. I've always wanted to express myself in interesting ways. Initially, I thought that was going to be in a career of creative writing, particularly in fiction. More on that later. But suffice it to say, I was doing a lot of gaming at the time. I went to USC for my undergrad, and I didn't focus on creative writing, at least not until my master's degree. I focused on political science because I wanted to have something of substance to convey through my writing. And that was very much the same case with my role-playing journey, because I graduated, you might say, or evolved from Dungeons and Dragons to playing Marvel superheroes, of all things. But I did Marvel superheroes in an interesting way. I ran a campaign where I would put out a sort of news brief, similar to what The Economist does, where they have little blurbs of current events. And I called it, of course, the Daily Planet, because I was going to be fusing both the Marvel world and the DC world. Well, in the Daily Planet, the players who were all playing superheroes could pursue those various news stories. They could look behind the news story to see what was really going on. And as the game went on, things got crazier and crazier because the whole title of the campaign was Worlds Without End. And it was a reference, of course, to the classic literary reference, and was basically all about that kind of apocalyptic change. It was the world was going to be significantly changing, and I wanted to key in on some of the political events that were happening at the time and tie them in to what was going on in the superhero genre. And then, of course, as things evolved, and after 9/11 and after the political landscape changed, I actually ran a Call of Cthulhu campaign that was set in 1930s Germany. It went from basically 1938 into the end of the war. The players all played sort of like German citizens. And so I was integrating what was going on, the horrors of the political experience in Germany, as well as the horrors of the Cthulhu mythos that were on the rise. And so after that, I really was trying to find some way to express a statement of meaning. I wrote a number of novel manuscripts. And then I realized, after going back to tabletop gaming in 2022, running a game for a while, that I was doing what I loved in writing games. I was doing what I loved in running games and extending the story in that way. And I kind of looked back at my entire life and I thought, gee, all of the other people in my master's program for creative writing who went on to become novelists tend to be the one that hung out with other novelists and hung out with other editors and hung out at the wine and cheese parties where you meet your agents and you meet publishers. Meanwhile, I was back at home rolling dice or writing up modules. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is what I was meant to do. And then to your initial question, Tom, I said, okay, but why am I doing this? Like, I don't want to just be another guy who's like, okay, I'm putting out a module because I think it's a cool idea. Or, I like Robert Howard, so I'm going to be doing my version of the Conan world. No, I really wanted something that was of value. And so I hit upon this notion that there are a lot of literary subjects or historical subjects that I'm aware of that I feel are kind of getting obscured in this day and age, which is to say that there's a lot of information being put out there, but that means that a lot of what I would call primary source material is not getting a lot of focus. And I know how significant in my own intellectual evolution, particularly in the realm of critical thinking, learning about history was and learning about great books were. So I decided, okay, I'm going to create Pleas Publishing to basically facilitate education through gaming and my own writing will be focused on either great books, authentic folklore, a lot of which is being sort of reiterated to death, that we understand folklore only through the lens of like the latter 20th century's interpretation, or little known works. For instance, my first module was called Champions of the Goblin Market, and it's a reference to Christina Rossetti's poem, Goblin Market, which is an early feminist kind of, I would hesitate to say epic poem, but it's a very long poem. So that's my role-playing story.
Can I ask, as a history teacher, you perked up definitely in primary source material. I think you already gave one example, but can you give me a couple others? What sort of primary source material kind of speaks to you the most, or what sort of things are you most interested to bring to light?
Right, absolutely. So I'll just name three that I'm currently like integrating into the campaign setting where a lot of the modules that Witch Pleas puts out is set, and that's the land of lore, lore spelled Lohre. Number one, I would say that when you look at the evolution of D&D style narratives, which is to say fantasy style narratives, there's some works like Spenser's The Fairy Queen that really convey that. We have, for those listeners that aren't as familiar with it, basically, I would say it's a pre-Tudor tract, and you probably know the era better than I do, guys, but I think it was around the 15th century that Spenser was writing. It might have been the 16th century, but suffice it to say that even though it's a poem, I guess it was written contemporaneously with Elizabeth. So therefore, it would have been the early 17th, late 16th century. But anyway, The Fairy Queen, it reads like a summary of a D&D campaign. You've got knights running around battling each other, and they're battling evil sorcerers, and dragons are popping up all over, and people die and they get resurrected, and all this astonishing stuff is happening. And I don't think that a lot of people are aware these days that those kinds of narratives in that full form existed back then. I think that they either consider that it would be piecemeal or an oral tradition, but it's those kinds of things that I want to bring forward. The other thing is some political equivalence and the culture of it. So as a for instance, one of the things that fascinates me is the disparity between cultures that historically I would consider to be state-oriented and others that are more individual-oriented. And given that that's not sort of a common designation, I'll explain. I would consider the works of, say, Virgil to be very state-oriented, where the Romans, and in this particular example, Virgil's Aeneid, talk about how it's virtuous to sort of exercise your own efforts or possibly even sacrifice yourself on the behalf of the state. A grander vision, a nation. Whereas if you go back to Greek history or Greek mythology, it's much more individual. You know, Hercules, Jason, Theseus, these are guys out for themselves, and they do terrible things in order to achieve their ends. And that kind of attitude, we see a version of it in the Nordic mythology, where they basically are telling people, if you're going to go by the writ of Odin, if you don't die in battle, you're going to go to hell. You're going to go to a very bad place. You've enjoyed the straw death and you're going to be a shade. But if you die in battle, then you get to party forever with your fellow warriors, get trash, go battle every day, and then do it all over again. And it's great. And the notion of, in essence, those two cultural modes is so interesting because we, especially today in the Western world, are very accustomed to the more state-oriented mindset. But the Viking culture and a lot of the early Greek culture lends itself to what I would typify as almost kind of a serial killer mentality, where you're being told, like, look, get out there, break into people's homes, take their stuff. If you die in battle, good on you. Do what you got to do, in essence, to get your own. And therefore, I bring that into Witch Pleases by having a mythology whereby there are certain equivalents of deities that are much more state-oriented. I have an equivalent of what would be sort of like a Crusader-era Christ. But I also have a figure named Araxes, the god of heroes, who would basically be as close to chaotic evil as you can get, because he's basically telling you, do what you got to do to get a bunch of loot and die gloriously, and I'll embrace you. And then lastly, in order to, again, present that sort of historical framework, I grew up on a series called the Enchanted World books by Time Life. They came out during the 80s. They're these beautiful cloth-bound books, the artist to die for. It would make even the most hardcore OSR fan absolutely swoon. And what they have in there, in every one of these volumes by Time Life, is a series of subjects. It could be like on dragons, on spells and bindings, witches and warlocks, elves, etc., etc. And it traces in these volumes the evolution from basically Neolithic times, what the legends are about them, up until like the late Renaissance times. And so what I attempt to do through Which Pleas writing, especially in the lore setting, is to go back to that original interpretation, a lot of which has been significantly lost in some ways. And some, like elves, for instance, are seen in a relatively authentic lens because we have Tolkien, and he has the whole notion of elves being immortal beings, and they are very close to that old concept of the fair folk. But just to give an example, vampires, for instance, were very different back in the age. They didn't have the ability to turn into bats. They can turn into crows, and they could turn into mist and so forth, but not into bats. You killed them in very different ways. And so, again, going back to that original source material is something that I really want to do, so that even contemporary fans who understand the fantasy genre through the 20th century lens, and often through the lens of Gary Gygax's world, can see that in point of fact, authentic sources saw legendary a very different way.
I don't know that we've ever taken such a deep dive into that very first question of, tell us about your RPG.
Sorry.
No, this is awesome, because I actually have another question about it.
Yeah.
And I can't get my mind off of this, and I need to ask about it. Is, tell us a little bit more about using in the superheroes, in your Marvel superheroes, about using news articles to drive the story. Did you write those? Did you take them from an actual newspaper? How did that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off taking the opening pages of, as I referenced, The Economist. The Economist is a periodical that basically has these little one-paragraph synopses, and they're pretty short paragraphs, and they're about all manner of subjects. So these could be international relations subjects, these could be domestic politics, they could be cultural affairs, and so forth. And so I took that template, and then, to your point, Tom, the initial adventures were pretty much just taken right from that. But I would do little twists on it. So, for instance, maybe I would have a story about Russia. And in the real world, it could be like, Russia is arguing with China over trade policies. In my world, my version of the Daily Planet, I would tweak it and say, well, Russia is arguing over trade policies, and there are, mysterious flashes of light by the Chinese border, and so forth. And in, I guess you could call it almost sort of a West Marches style of running the game, the players would play heroes. They called themselves the Defiants. So the Defiants would come together, whoever could attend the game, and we would get together on my back patio, usually over In-N-Out Burger, and we would have them decide what to investigate. Now, to your point, things got weirder and weirder. As the world started to proliferate with superheroes and supervillains, metahumans in general, the news stories would get stranger and stranger, and my role of editing would get more and more away from current events. But I would always try and make sure to leaven in as much current events as possible.
I guess I just find that to be fascinating, because it makes a nice connection to where we're headed here and talking about education and schools, because I think some people have a difficult time, and I'm not talking about people that listen to this show, but some people outside of the RPG realm have a difficult time seeing role-playing as anything other than Dungeons and Dragons, fantasies, dragons, and all the make-believe, which we all know is as valuable as anything else. But if we want to bring role-play into a current day situation, what a great tool to use, something, bringing in current events using newspapers. The Economist, I think about the publication, The Week, that also gives bite-sized articles of international and national significance. So cool idea starters right there. So, I mean, anyone listening has already gotten their money's worth. But we have tons more to talk about. So let's move into your project of RPG for teachers. How did that get started, and where are you right now?
Right. Well, whenever I am confronted with an opportunity in the form of a challenge that I think is going to bring value to many people, my first thought is, okay, well, what can I, given my skill set, do? So as I was sitting there, and this was initially at Kathleen's keynote address, but then it really cohered when I attended your panel. I was thinking to myself, all right, what I'm hearing in very basic form is that it's easy enough for students or teachers to find game stores or libraries, but it's very difficult for game stores or libraries to find out whether there's a local game club at a school or games being involved in a classroom. And so I'm thinking, okay, I would really like, as a creator of education-oriented materials, to be able to find those clubs. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I'm sure that every one of the gaming companies that I've been networking with would love to be able to extend donations, facilitate, and so forth. And so I thought, okay, I don't really know a whole lot about logistics. And so taking on the mission of gathering up game materials and putting them in the hands of schools, that's a little bit beyond me. There are greater minds at that. And in fact, I had the privilege of discovering one of those great minds, a guy by the name of John Franklin, who's associated with Let's Quest After School. I think he's been on this show. Perfect, exactly. So, but I did realize, okay, I am a digital marketer. So I know how to create a website relatively well. I'm not a web designer, but I definitely know how to network effectively in the digital realm. And what I thought would be great to design is a website that, as you were saying earlier, Dan, before we got on the call, allowed people to see what game clubs are at what locations at what time. And so that would allow game stores and libraries to come to the site and realize what after school programs or even classroom programs are in their area, but also that would allow teachers to make the case for integrating gaming into their schools. So that could be as an after school program or as a classroom. And by what I mean by make the case is, if this could be making an appeal based on a case study as to how gaming assists critical thinking, socialization, team building, kids on the spectrum. There's a lot of material out there, but it tends to be kind of scattered all over the place. So I wanted to bring that all together. It could be a quick start guide of here's how you run one of these clubs. Here's how you get it started. Here's how you market it within your school. Here's how you make the case to your superintendent. Here's how you make the case to, a private school or a charter school or what have you. And then other articles that assist that, teaching specific subjects, as a for instance, here's how you can integrate an English curriculum into it. It's a very nascent site, but the good thing is that, much like yourselves, there have been a lot of other authorities, especially in the educational realm, that have gotten particularly interested. One of whom is a group called Educators for Excellence. They're a national organization, and their mission is to empower teachers to have a say in the issues that affect their students as well as their curriculum on the whole. And they were particularly excited, especially, Tom, like you were saying, about the notion of expanding beyond just the fantasy genre into the kinds of stories and the kind of educational subjects that could make a significant difference for a broader demographic of kids. And as you say, nothing wrong with the fantasy genre, but there are a lot of other narratives out there, and we're at such an exciting time culturally where the tabletop RPG community is drawing in new demographics right and left. And by that, I largely mean a younger demographic, nothing unfamiliar to you guys, drawing in pupils, but also other genders and the interest in their narratives. I can't tell you how many female gamers I've met recently, and they usually tell me, oh, I came to it because of Baldur's 3. But then I sat down with my DM and I expected a Baldur's 3 experience, but instead I got, okay, there's a combat encounter. Now you're going to have a long rest. And there's another combat encounter. Now you're going to go back to the town. What are you going to do in town? Well, you're going to buy more ammo. That's what you're going to do. You're going to buy some ammo. You're going to buy some oil flasks, and you're going to get back out there. And what they're looking for is basically other systems that facilitate other kinds of narratives. And so I think that that's particularly exciting, like you were saying, potential in the educational sphere.
Can I ask, and again, this may be work in progress, but have you discovered or sort of generated any ideas about how you yourself sort of maybe reach out to game clubs to get them to sign, to get them to know about your site and register?
Well, being on your show is a first step for that, and thank you for that. Making connections with groups like Educators for Excellence is another aspect of it, because they have a mailing list, a blog, a newsletter, and so forth that can spread the word about rpgsforteachers.com. I've also been reaching out to game companies, both in concert with John Franklin over at Let's Quest, but also independently, because they'll have distribution networks and be able to reach out to active game companies. For instance, I have a pretty close relationship with Goodman Games, who they, as publishers of the DCC system, where I create most of my materials, have something called a road crew. And that's basically a program where if you have a gaming club, they will send you free materials and swag and so on and so forth. So those kinds of networks, to your point, are going to allow me to extend RPGs for Teachers into that realm. And I still stay in contact with people like Kathleen, because I'd love to have more and more educators be an authority on the site. I think I did a fairly good job coming up with a nice basis of articles, but I would love to have actual educators be guest writers on the site, or even staff writers on the site. Recently, John introduced me to a Discord server, and the fellow that runs the server is part of a group called Tabletop EDU. And there again, it gives me access to a number of educators who I would love to have write their own experiences, their case studies, subjects of concern. So when I joined that server, my first question was, what's the number one challenge that you face as a teacher trying to get a game club going, or having that game club be successful, so that we can have articles, ideas.
Thanks. That's really good to know, because I mean, you probably remember when we spoke at Gen Con, I struggled to find, I just ended up doing a Google search just to find enough game clubs to be able to send a survey out to. So yeah, that's always in the back of my mind. There's got to be some way to tap into these folks. And
yeah, it's sort of a tenet of corporate marketing. So I'm going to let some of my day job show here, that you want to reach people where they're already at. So to your point, it's like, okay, if these game clubs, especially educator game clubs, aren't already out there on the internet, and of course, in many cases, it makes sense that they wouldn't be, where are they already? Okay, they will probably be reading some sort of academic or education-oriented periodicals. They might be part of mailing lists associated with that. And furthermore, you can come at them from the perspective of their favorite publishers. And I don't know, we're at the point where I can get the attention of Wizards of the Coast and 5e community, but there are still inroads, especially through the third-party networks, where I could reach them, because I've yet to find the diehard 5e person that's like, I'm only running and paying attention to Wizards of the Coast. Usually they'll have a favorite independent publisher here or there, or maybe a backup system that they like. And so that means that if I could get Goodman to listen or Paizo to listen, access their mailing list, and make people aware of rpgsforteachers.com through that, then I can access them.
That's exciting to hear. Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
It is. One thing, I'm just sitting here thinking, why are we, being school game clubs, such a challenge to get out there? And I'm thinking it through, and our goal is to get kids involved in schools, to give kids opportunities to have those experiences of sitting down at a table, being creative, thinking with other students, which we know where the world we live in today, and that is a unique experience anymore in many cases. And so I think when I look at okay, reaching out as a game club sponsor, reaching out to the community, that's hard, especially if I live in an area where I do not have a game store in my region, and I know there are places where that is. I mean, and we're talking not just in that town, but we're talking even in like a county or
Right.
a region of their state. We're fortunate to have multiple game stores within our 15-mile radius where we are, and so that's not even on my radar. And then we look at the public libraries, and I think there's a lot of public libraries that's the gaming is just a part of programming that seems like a lot of work. We've talked to librarians in our area where it's just like, I just don't know that I'm an expert in this to where I think I can run something like that. And so I guess my point in saying this isn't because I don't think schools are interested in that collaboration. I definitely think they are. I think a teacher or a librarian like myself in a school would see the value of making those connections, because one thing I think of is I don't know everything. And so if I can get a game store owner in to talk about what's in the market, if I can get a public library to collaborate with me and maybe share resources and things like that, that is a bonus to me. But I am time starved as the quote teacher, a school employee, to be like, okay, I'm going to spend some time today reaching out to others. But having something that you're talking about, a database or a one-stop place where I can go, or a place where people can go to a public library or a game store or even a company publisher to say, who could we help out today? They go to your database and they say, here's a couple game clubs in our area, or let's reach out across the country and let's reach out to them. I can't even tell you what kind of a benefit that would be.
Yes, absolutely. That is indeed the vision. And I've yet to really work it much on the game store angle. I have reached out, as you'd imagine, to libraries, because I would love to get libraries on the site, at least in the function of being open to supporting game clubs and so forth. Because yes, primarily RPGs for Teachers as a database for after-school clubs and classes that involve gaming is important, but it's also important that the other aspects of the network also have a presence there so that people can find each other. So I have sort of old family ties, you might say, with the Library of Pasadena, California. I'm going to be talking with them just to get their take on how to access the network of librarians and get them on the site as well.
So when I go to your website, what should, not me personally, I've already been there, but people listening to the show, what should they expect to find when they come and visit your website? And it is, I had it right in front of me. It's rpgforteachers.com.
You got it, rpgsforteachers.com. So basically the homepage is intended to split what we in the marketing arm call the user journey into a couple directions. One is looking for networking opportunities. Sign up your game club so that people can find you. And in particular, libraries and game stores and publishers can find you. The other experience is finding out resources, those articles, in order to empower teachers to get a club going, make a case for it, perhaps integrate education into their game. And that's the basic premise right now. There should be I know we were kind of joking about this before, a relatively easy sign-up process for the database, though full disclosure, as I alluded to the fact that I'm not the best of web designers, I'm using a plugin at this point, and I am looking out there for anybody who knows how to get a decent database up onto a WordPress site. So if any listeners want to reach out to me and show me the many ways that I have gone wrong, that would be great. But basically, a relatively easy way to sign up for the calendar is what it is right now, which is what we use for networking, or you can go to the articles and then search the various articles.
Yeah, I liked those, the articles that you have on there. I really like the idea that you were talking about of inviting guest authors to come in and share their experiences and their stories, because I have always been fortunate in the schools that I've been in, that I've started game clubs at, that I've never been questioned or asked the relevance of it. But as a librarian, my goal is to get kids into the library, and I don't think anyone's going to question it. Where people might run into some of that is when they're implementing it into their classrooms. So all of the tools and all of the resources that are easy for a teacher to grab and say, here's the research, here are the stories from other schools. That is valuable information, and having that in one place, like your website, RPGs for Teachers, is a wonderful resource.
I'm very excited about it. And I think that we're almost there. It's been a particularly busy season for people since Gen Con for a variety of different reasons. But I've made contacts, as I say, with a number of authorities, reaching out to that one server, tabletop EDU, I think is going to be really successful, because that's where teachers already are, who are familiar in the gaming community. So for them to share their perspectives, their experience, and their findings would be tremendously valuable. And then you never know where you might find a teacher. There's this great personality among the Goodman Games crew. The guy's name is Joy Royale. Is this brilliant, generous personality, and he happens to be an elementary school principal up in Connecticut. And I had the privilege of sitting down with him for a few hours, where he talked about things from the administrator's perspective, talking about teaching to the standard, talking about core curriculum and so forth. And there again, my conversations with Educators for Excellence have been very valuable, because they focus on the public school system. And that isn't to say that our services are exclusive to public school, but I almost feel that if you can make a case in the public schools, you can make it anywhere, or just about.
Yeah. Dan, what else do you have on RPG for Teachers?
Well, Tom, you and I have talked about this. I'm a horrible interviewer, because I just get so caught up in what is being said, and I just absorb it all, and I don't have any questions. So I've just been frantically scribbling down all of these references that I need to go check out and see if we can get ourselves connected in with, because they sound very promising.
I am doing the same, and I suspect that people listening to this will also be doing so as well. So let me move on. Let's transition a bit. You have a project going on right now on Campfire. Tell us about Campfire and what that project is all about.
Well, here again, the value of putting oneself out there. I was at an Indie Creator Summit. This was basically sort of a virtual conference that Goodman Games organized in early 2024, January 2024. And in the audience of that was an award-winning game designer. He won awards for 2 games in 2023 and then earlier in 2022. Wojciech Borowicz was the gentleman's name. He's from Dublin, Ireland, of course, as opposed to Dublin, California. And he reached out and he said, I have this game that basically is a very rules-light, adaptable game. I call it Campfire. And what I'd like to do with it is publish it through Pleas. I was honored. I looked at the game. The rule system was solid. One of the things that I really liked was the simplicity of it. Because once again, looking at the Gen Con experience, the conversation I had with Wojciech was prior to Gen Con. When we look at the value of an intro role-playing game, the ability for students or players to not only enjoy the rules and understand the rules, but to teach it to their peers was so critical. And so the simplicity of Campfire allowed not only flexibility across genres, but also for players of a younger age to quickly internalize it and evangelize or communicate it to their friends. So one of the things that I felt would be of advantage, again, when we talk about doing things of meaning or of value, was having a system placed in the hands of youth, in particular in the educational environment, that could be adapted for almost any kind of story. Because Wojciech's initial concept was you could have any kind of genre. So you could have a heist kind of game, or you could have a survival horror game, or you could have a action adventure game. But I was thinking, you could have a game where you're playing in the court of Henry VIII, and you're managing the tensions between Protestantism and Catholicism. You could have a game set in the Gilded Age, and you could explore class issues. You could have all manner of games because using this very basic framework of let's define your character's attributes, let's get a very basic plot structure together, and then use randomization in order to determine how certain events in the plot go. The adaptability is tremendous. And there's an adage that I have attributed to Confucius. I like to believe the man said it. It's up on the Which Pleas site, and it is that I see and I forget, I hear and I learn, I do and I know. And basically, I truly believe that the advantages of role-playing for education are vast because, for one, it gives that personal engagement. But for another, Tom, like you were saying, we are currently in sort of a cultural climate where divisiveness is the number one opponent of the day. And in some ways, I would say a genuine threat to the evolution of our society. And I don't just mean political divisiveness, because being in marketing, one of the things that you learn is that the algorithm for targeting and personalization of effective marketing lends itself towards isolation, which is to say that whether we're talking about the Meta platform or a particular blog or what have you, it's very narrowly targeted towards a particular group. And you will receive data as a marketer, seeing what's successful to cater to that group. And that, by its very nature, tends to exclude others. And unfortunately, the marketing lessons, and I like to say that I'm in an agency that's an exception to this, but many agencies, many marketing techniques revolve around what are called pain points. And that's because marketing is most successful when you make somebody feel something. We have a saying that people make decisions around how something makes them feel as opposed to what they know. And unfortunately, one of the easiest feelings to evoke is that flight or fight. It's anxiety. And so we talk in marketing about pain points, activating pain points, whether that's the fear of missing out, the fear of losing your hair, the fear of gaining weight or being excluded or what have you. And so we live in this culture where the very economic mechanisms that we live in generate fear and divisiveness. Well, that's not great for cooperation. But the great thing about the role-playing is that by its very nature, you're putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so I referred earlier to that panelist at Gen Con, that philosophy professor, Archie Fields. He talks a lot about what's called alibi. An alibi is basically the philosophical concept where you can make decisions almost more rationally or objectively if you're seeing it from another's perspective. As a for instance, I might say to myself, if I was confronted on the street by somebody who seemed very sick, but also seemed quite contagious, I don't know what I would do as Matt, but I have a certain sense because I am Matt. But then again, I might evaluate that same encounter from the perspective of a paramedic. I might evaluate that same encounter from the perspective of a pregnant woman or somebody who perhaps has immune issues and might be very susceptible to disease. And so that element of alibi through role-playing allows you to evaluate a subject from all these different perspectives. And I would argue that in combination with the socialization of doing it in a tabletop environment where you have direct interaction with your peers, you feel supported, you sort of let your guard down, is exactly what we need at this time. And so I was very excited about Campfire, and Wojciech has a number of other ideas that are actually directly oriented towards cooperation on solving local issues. And I think that it's going to be a thrilling year for Witch Pleas around this project, as well as the various people who pick up Campfire.
So what are the logistics of that? I'm looking at the website, and the thing that caught my eye was you can get your stories published. So it goes to Kickstarter in, it looks like December?
It does, yes. December 14th or so.
Are you still accepting stories?
We most certainly are. And we're going to start proliferating it as of this interview. I will confess that in the third party industry, we do things on the fly sometimes. And so Wojciech and I met after Gen Con, and we talked about a media campaign and a rollout. And I will note that this interview was an integral part of that, because I felt like it's extending Campfire to a crowd that would really embrace its value. But to your point, Tom, we've set up a website that is collecting stories to be published as part of the Campfire Kickstarter. We call them vignettes, these various modules or adventures that we have for Campfire. And I felt like this is such a collaborative product. It's all about reaching out to people. It's all about how easy it is to create stories within the system. What better than to have a user-generated content campaign, as we call it, where we call upon the crowd to submit their ideas at that website, and we will publish at least one of them, possibly more of them, because one aspect of Campfire is how easy it is to produce these modules. So no doubt we will have one that's going to be in print, a number that will likely be represented digitally, and then probably more down the line.
I think this is fascinating. I think that is so cool. I look forward to that. Did I hear you say December 14th was a date that?
Yes, December 14th is when it's going to launch.
Okay, very good. Wow, I want to rewind here just a bit, because you were saying some things in my very simple mind that wanted to pat myself on the back. You lit a little fire there when you were talking about how RPGs give us that experience of like putting ourselves into other people's shoes.
Yes.
Which I think is such an important thing to understanding others. And so where my patting myself on the back, and I think anybody who leads a game club or teaches kids how to role play in the classroom or has any role in any of that deserves a pat on the back, because that's what we're doing. We're giving kids that opportunity to put themselves in different people's shoes and look at things from a different angle. I know that there's situations where kids will just play themselves in a game, but even then they're still experimenting in ways in which they might not have the opportunity in, quote, real life. So I appreciate you sharing that story and just giving us that validation that what we're doing is good. And what we're doing is helping a new generation of leaders, if you ask me. I mean, I look at my game club, and most of these kids at some point in their lives are going to be leaders, because when they run a game or when they stand up in a game and they make some sort of a speech to the other players, that's a skill, man. That is so awesome. Okay. I want to talk about one more thing and give you an opportunity. You've mentioned Witch Pleas Publishing many times. And so I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that project. I think it's probably more than a project for you. It sounds like it's bigger than that, but talk about that and how people can get involved or discover what Witch Pleas has to offer.
Absolutely. So the easiest way to discover Witch Pleas is simply to go to witchpleas.com. Now, for those listeners out there, it's pleas without the E. It's as in the pleas of the witches out there, because the initial concept actually came from my wife. We were sitting around on a patio, kind of reflecting on the successes of this one period of our lives, and then decided, okay, where to go from here? And she said, I would love a publishing company that really allows unheard voices to be expressed. And that has since transformed into enabling the voices of educators and pupils to have a conversation through our materials. So witchpleas.com is the way to find it. Right now, the catalog is rather lean. I've only been at this for about a year. We have 3 modules around a series called A Tale of Two Sisters. It's right now for Dungeon Crawl Classics. Once Wizards of the Coast gets their new rules sorted all out, we're going to transfer over to 5e to extend it to even more people. It's drawn from my own experiences with literature. It speaks to the various topics, some of which we addressed right here, that I thought were relevant for great books and for history. And right now it has a Kickstarter going on. You could find it through going onto Kickstarter and searching DCC Massive Module, DCC being Dungeon Crawl Classics. And right now we are closing out the 5 adventure series, A Tale of Two Sisters, with 2 final books that are a little bit more than modules. In every one of my modules, I try and convey not just the adventure itself, which I hope is interesting and educational enough, but also something that I call a sense of place, which is to say that wherever the adventure takes place, I have a recipe, because I believe involving the tastes and smells of another culture and environment is very important. Besides some of my favorite gaming experiences, were gathering around a big bunch of food as well as rolling dice with my friends. And it has an element of what we sometimes refer to as Appendix N. There's always an excerpt from one of the influential works in there. And in the case of Hunters of the Goblin Grove and Feast of the Goblin Winter, those are the two modules that are on Kickstarter right now. Those have all of those sections, but they also have a little bit of world building or campaign setting elements. These are encounter ideas. In Hunters of the Goblin Grove, we have over 240 encounter ideas. We kind of go back to that second edition or even first edition Dungeon Master's Guide approach, which is having long lists of random tables of kooky inspiration for people to draw on. And we also have richly developed NPCs, adventure hooks associated with all their histories, price tables that allow you to travel around the entire world, buy spell components, buy thief services, tons of supporting materials. So I think those would be the best ways to find Witch Pleas. And as you mentioned, we also have the Campfire user-generated user-generated content page up there. And I wanted to address one thing that I left out mentioning, which is that when we talk about submitting story ideas, it's very lean. Don't think, those of you out there who are interested, you need to come up with a whole 3-page module in presses. We're talking 1 paragraph to describe your story, 5 characters to be in it, and you were off to the races.
Tom, you're probably already ahead of me, but I've been running through the game club members that I think need to know about this.
Yes.
Excellent.
I definitely have some names in mind.
And a couple of graduates that I think would also jump at this chance.
Yes, indeed. And Matt, I just wanted to say, this is what, when Dan and I, when we started this podcast, there are a few things goals that we had. Number one was we just wanted to talk about our games and have a place. And we thought maybe people would want to listen to that. And so that's how we started this. But something that grew out of all of that is the opportunity to talk to people like you, third-party creators, people who are wanting to share what they have. And just, I love the flavor that third-party people bring in. Your whole scent and taste of the, I just love that. What a cool angle and a lot of fun to add there. Wanted to mention, you're talking about DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classic. We in our game club have been trying to diversify outside of just Dungeons and Dragons. It's the gateway game. Kids know it. They've heard about it, blah, blah, blah. And so we've been trying to diversify. And last year we brought DCC to our game club, and they're having a great time. And I think the person we have running it, our friend Mark, he's a perfect DM for DCC because he's cold and heartless in the most loving way, of course.
He's a math teacher, so obviously.
Yes, he's a math teacher. Anyway, so we've got that. We've had Jen Brinkman from DCC on the show before, and we love that company. And just it's exciting to hear that you are working with them so closely on so many things. All right, wow, Matt, you keep yourself busy for sure. But before we go, I wanted to give you an opportunity to, we've covered a lot, but to tell people how can they reach out to you regarding, RPGs for teachers or Witch Pleas Publishing, or if they have questions about Campfire, where can people reach out to you and ask those questions?
Right. So there is a contact form as well as an email on witchpleas.com. That email is witchpleaspublishing@gmail.com. We'll be getting domain addresses set up soon. But for now, if it ain't broke, don't fix it is our philosophy there. And you could also find us on social media. We have a Facebook page about Witch Pleas Publishing. I'm often on the DCC Rocks community on Facebook, but I also believe in the KISS principle, the whole keep it simple. So I think the best answer to your question is just go on witchpleas.com and email us at witchpleaspublishing@gmail.com.
Man, I can't wait to hear. You've said, you started this about a year ago. I can't wait to follow the progress. of all of these items, from Witch Pleas Publishing to the campfire, and hear about how that Kickstarter goes and the stories that you've got there, as well as to watch RPGs for Teachers continue to grow. So we will definitely stay in touch and look forward to the progress along the way. So I guess that wraps things up here in the dungeon. Say, Dan?
I think so.
All righty. Well, as we say every week, for Dan, I'm Tom. Oh, and for Matt as well, thank you for joining us here in the dungeon. And until next time, keep rolling those 20s. See you next week, folks.